Hey everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. It's excellent to be at a panel with 4 women talking about climate funding. And we don't have much time, so let me go and dive straight in. Rosito, Tatiana Rosito. Funding is one of the pillars for the climate agenda in Brazil, and we're talking about an equity fund that is here to catalyze investment that's going to be working on the Brazil investment platform. How does this funding fit into this platform, and how important is it? Thank you, Marta. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you, Mafalda and Luciana. The Green Climate Fund and BNDES are key entities here for the ecology and for our transformation. Well, the platform, as the name already makes evident, aims at connecting strategic goals in Brazil, the climate agenda, our ambitions at NDC, for example, connecting them with fundable programs that go through a very clear program. We're really focusing on increasing private funding. We have identified, not only in the past years, but in the platform that has been running for about a year now, we identified the need for more capital to catalyze things. So on the platform, we try and connect a group of projects with funding entities, be it multilateral banks, climate banks, that will help reduce risk, because the platform seeks to incentivize innovation projects with innovative technology that will contribute to reindustrialization and that will take advantage of all of the potential that Brazil has in nature-based solutions and the decarbonization of the industry. And for these technologies to get to the market and help agents in their decision-making, catalytic capital is absolutely crucial. The platform is headquartered at BNDES, and we started acting to see how we could address this bottleneck. And Mafalda and Luciana can talk a little bit more about this fund that is being organized by this call for bids from BNDES, and we also expect the contribution from the GCF. Luciana, let's talk about the role of BNDES in this process. BNDES is greener and greener, focusing ever more on energy transition programs. What is the main bottleneck to get to private funding? Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with Mafalda and Tatiana on this panel. These are very important partners in this crusade of building the investment platform for Brazil and in attracting capital from public and private investors so that we can help the energy transition in the country. BNDES is the greatest infrastructure bank in the Americas. We had the first wave of the ecological transition in Brazil, and we've been doing that for many decades. Bloomberg knows that BNDES is the greatest funder for renewable energy in the world. The energy structure or infrastructure and the whole structure here is funded by BNDES one way or another. BNDES has the expertise to really develop new industries. When Brazil built the new hydroelectric plants, BNDES was there funding them. When we increased wind and solar power, BNDES was also funding it. As Tatiana said, we have the strategic platforms for the transformation of the country, and we are connected to new technologies and to new industries. And there is a challenge to mobilize capital and to make these projects fundable at the start.
Então, por isso, e o BNDES tem essa expertise. A plataforma, ela, além de ter os projetos, ela é um locus que mobiliza capital e que discute política pública. O BNDES é, acima de tudo, um policy bank. Então, e o BNDES, mais recentemente, agora na nossa gestão, na gestão do presidente Aloysio Mercadante, a gente trabalha em parceria com o mercado de capitais e com os bancos privados de uma forma muito mais próxima. O BNDES, desde 2023, começou a ancorar grandes operações de mercado de capitais no setor de infraestrutura. A gente está financiando os projetos na modalidade non-recourse, limited recourse de dívida.
We've been financing debt in a more innovative way. We have developed multiple instruments to finance these projects that have allowed BNDES to twofold its approvals in infrastructure and energy. Minister Haddad has just mentioned that Brazil is living a super cycle of investment in infrastructure. We've been growing above 15% in Brazil in recent years, even though between 15 and 21 we dropped. We could regain that growth because we have a coordinated effort with the Ministry of Finance and other ministries that are connected with energy and infrastructure. President Lula has enhanced its and out new infrastructure, right? It is a new infrastructure for the Brazilian ecological revolution. And we have that expertise. And with the recent innovations, we have working very hard, fundamented by the big operations. And in that sense, BNDES also work with the multilateral entities, because the funding will come from the private sector, 60-70%, but whatever will come from the public sector and philanthropies will help us better channel the resources for where they must go. That share that will come from Climate Fund and SIF, all of that will help us allocate that funding where it's most needed. BNDES has 73 years of experience. We took part in all of the big cycles of the Brazilian economy. We were there. So we have an expertise that is local, is national, and when we work in tandem with the big multilateral entities, then we add governance so that the money goes where it must go to. And we will be doing that via this platform. Paulo, when I was preparing for this panel, I read an interview that you gave to Valor Econômico, explaining how difficult is the financing part of the equation, because there are a ton of projects, and you need to be able to attract the funding. Thinking about that, how do you see such initiatives as this catalytic fund, and how do you think Brazil? How is Brazil doing? Hi, Martha. I'm so happy to be able to speak Portuguese. And I apologize if I slip in the odd English term, okay? It is a pleasure to be here with Tatiana, Luciana, and Marta, a panel of women leaders. That is fantastic. Now, answering your question, we see this country platform of Brazil as an example, a great role model, and we are very positive that it will bring important results to Brazil, and it is a model to be copied by other countries. For a while, we've been trying to drive countries to encourage them to not think on a project basis, but to think about the big picture, the big investment areas, and which ones need a sit at the table, so to say, to better align financing. And at the same time, debate matters, as Luciana said, that pertain to politics. What politics are needed today in order to unlock or foster investment in the areas that are climate aligned? Now, Brazil, in a very short period of time, as we could see, I think the platform was launched just 1 year ago, right? So in this short time, Brazil could see some interesting results. An important coordination between the different public and private actors in Brazil. And in all of the conversations with the government, with the BNDES, one thing became very clear to us, and it did not surprise us because we've seen that in other countries. The fact that one of the bottlenecks is precisely the lack of catalytic equity. The Green Climate Fund, GCF, has invested more than $2 billion in catalytic equity in the most different geographies. India, the lowest developed countries in Africa. And we always understood that this was one of the areas that had no funding. No funding to tackle that problem. So here in Brazil, what we can see is that this whole platform process, with the possibility of identifying most strategic investments and how can we better use funding from the GCF, because this is the type of funding that we lack in the market. There's a scarcity of this particular type of fund. We can have a risk spreadsheet, we can fine-tune to what each project needs in such a way that even multilateral banks are not equipped to do. So, in that sense, strategic processes are very important for us, so that we rest assured that we are leveraging the best impact from the scarce funding that we have available. We are a $30 billion fund. At the moment, we have $19 billion invested. And demand surpasses the offer enormously, right? So we need to be very strategic in our investments. As Luciana said, we are talking about new technologies, investments that are yet to have a track record in the market, to respond to the difficulties that investors find. So with our equity, we can leverage commercial equity and debt. So that is the problem. From what we know, now we understand that this is one of the biggest problems in the Brazilian market. So in a very we see everything that is happening in Brazil in a very positive way. And just to conclude my answer, in the scope of COP30, in our dialogue with the Ministry of Finance, we've agreed that we wanted to encourage other countries to follow Brazilian steps. That does not mean that they should copy and paste it, because each one of them have their own particularities, but that they could somehow be inspired by Brazilian project and replicate that. And we said that if we could enlist 10 countries during COP30, that would be great. I'm not going to disclose what are said countries, but I'm very happy to announce that it will be more than 10. So we have said that if we had 10 countries that decided to follow the Brazilian model, that would be considered a win, but we will have more than 10 countries. And from that, we can see that Brazil is spearheading not only in a regional sphere, but in a global sphere as well. And we understand that the leverage, the impact will be greater. I know that you don't want to give us many spoilers. I understand that the overall tone of the message is positive, but my provocation for Tatiana is, how can you do such processes in a moment where many countries are indebted and they have to choose between allocating resources in their defenses, and when we have countries such as the United States deciding to remove themselves from the Paris Agreement? Yes. Marta, in order to answer your question, let me tell you about another initiative that we had government, which was the ministers cycle for COP30. Our COP30 ambassador, André Correia do Lago, had this idea, and its aim is to expand the funding for developing countries and advance the Baku to Belém roadmap. So we want to mobilize 1.3 trillion to developing countries coming from different sources. Half or more than half of that should come from the private sector. That is a humongous effort that demands expanding private investment 15 to 20 times. And in the public sector, the challenge is no smaller. So when you ask me about the difficulty of leveraging resources, well, this year we brought together 30 ministries of finance from the most advanced economies to the more vulnerable, less developed countries, islands, 35 countries. We had no mandate, but we had political capital and ambition. And that showcases these countries' commitment and their will to continue contributing focused on COP30 and implementation. In that sense, ministries of finance are fundamental to enable us to move from ambition to action and implementation. As our COP ambassador André do Lago says, we have a lot of financing negotiated. Now we need to be practical. We must implement that. And together with the ministries, we decided on 5 priority areas. We've talked about them. Expanding concessional funds and multilateral funds as well for them. The reform on the development institutions to ensure accessible long-term resources, but also to put together different operations and instruments as collaterals, for example, that may favor the leveraging of private capital. You talked about the country's indebtedness. So how can we contribute to more solid capital markets to absorb the debt and to handle the fiscal impact of climate risk? We are seeing increasingly more articulation, collaboration in the financial area, but we need to think about the fiscal sphere as well in the long run, not only when the natural disaster occurs. In our national sphere, the platforms are the core articulating these different elements. When we think about the private capital, we have to think not only about how to leverage such resources, but we need to put ourselves in their shoes, giving more collaterals, expanding loans in local currency mechanisms to mitigate the exchange risks. So we have been working with the Equity Invest established by our Treasury and the Ministry of Finance in a cooperation with the United Kingdom and IDB. So these are a series of mechanisms in order to turn blended finances into a reality. So all of the priorities are connected, right? And then we circle back to the platform. And the fifth priority is the regulatory area, including insurances, for example. So there is nothing hampering capital to flow from developing countries. Organizing the regulations to foster investments in these countries on the long term, and also taxonomy matters, as the ministry mentioned. Brazil has a proposal on super taxonomy at this COP, and we want to help all of these projects connect better, and also the carbon markets. We have now the open coalition of carbon markets, and our ministry has just launched the carbon market department. So our international agenda is backed up by our domestic agenda. We have a plan for ecological transformation. This is solid, it is broad, and we are focused on the future, the climate plan, the idea that we must tackle not only mitigation, but also adaptation and nature-based projects. This is a legacy that we want to have from this COP. Okay, I had 10 more questions for each one of you, and I thank you so much for your participation, but we'll have to wrap up to start the next panel. Thank you all so much.